Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another episode of Double Take. Today's episode is about medieval Hokum, and we're looking at John McTiernan's The 13th Warrior, starring Antonio Banderas, Antonio Banderas, and Outlander, starring Jim Caviezel, or Jim Banderas. Hokum is hard to do well. It's a bit like spoof films. For every Naked Gun and Hot Shots that for me is done really well, there's about 10 other films that are just dreadful. It's the same with Hokum. Hokum's not as easy to do as it seems. Obviously you can make your own arguments whether these two films do it well or not. But I love these two films. They're daft. They have flaws, but they're also deeply enjoyable. We'll start with The 13th Warrior, because that's the oldest one. Based on a Michael Crichton book, Eaters of the Dead. It was going to be called Eaters of the Dead. This is a film that had production problems, to say the least. Again, there'll be better experts out there than me, but I'll try and sum it up. It was originally optioned by Stuart Gordon of Reanimator fame, and then went through Martha Coolidge before coming to John McTiernan, obviously of Die Hard and Hunt for Red October and Predator fame. So he made the film in 1998, wasn't released until 1999. The studio didn't like it. It ran for 127 minutes. Michael Crichton was brought in and did reshoots, and the film was recut. Graham Revell originally did the music, but that score was removed, and Michael Crichton brought in Jerry Goldsmith to do a more kind of traditional action film score, and the film now runs at 102 minutes. So there's about 20-25 minutes of the McTiernan cut gone. I was actually thinking it'd be quite good if Arrow one day could actually magically find the McTiernan cut and we could actually see the difference in the film, because I'm guessing the McTiernan stuff had more character, and you can just see studios executives just going, this film isn't moving quickly enough, let's just cut all that character nonsense out. It is a flawed film, but it's also a lot of fun. Antonio Banderas stars as an Arab Muslim scribe poet who gets exiled for getting a little bit too familiar with the caliph's wife. So he's kind of sent out as a diplomat to strange and dangerous countries. We guess that maybe the film starts in Russia. Him and Omar Sharif, who just turns up. Yes, Omar Sharif's in it. Are being chased by Tartars, and then the Tartars are scared because there's Norsemen in their big scary Viking boats, because Vikings did kind of go into that area. They did try and take on Russia at one point, so they kind of come across this group of Vikings, and they get involved, and then there's a boy who appears in a strange boat, and he brings news of this trouble, and the Vikings' help is needed. I mean, the story is kind of almost a Beowulf story mixed in with Viking legends of like 12 warriors. So they come to this conclusion. There's a kind of old Siri woman who goes, oh, you need 13 warriors, but the 13th warrior has to be an outsider. And strangely enough, it's Antonio Banderas. Or Banderas. I think I'm going to call him Antonio Banderas from now on. So he has to go with the other 12 guys to find out what the hell's going on. And villages are being attacked, people are being killed. They think by dragons and strange creatures. And we find out as the film goes on the truth. And it's a good old fun adventure, despite its flaws. You can see there's a better film probably in there somewhere in the stuff that got cut out, but it's still a lot of fun, and I do have a soft spot for it. So then we go to Outlander from 2008, starring Jim Caviezel, directed by Howard McCain, who hasn't really done anything of any note. Again, you could argue that this isn't of any note, but that's merely subjective. And this stars Jim Caviezel as the outsider, but he's a spaceman. He lands in planet Earth amongst Vikings, and he is hunting a creature. Again, it's been attacking villages. The Vikings think it's a bear or Gunnar, played with aplomb by Ron Perlman. He's not in the film much, but he leaves an impression. So they just think it's another tribe of feuding Vikings until they realise the truth. It's this big space monster who kind of looks a lot like the Emmerich version of Godzilla. And again, it's the usual, they distrust the outsider, and then they learn his ways, and then he helps them, and again, complete nonsense, but also hugely enjoyable. John Hurt knows he's in complete hokum, but he still delivers his performance as the leader of the clan with gusto. It's interesting watching the films kind of back to back almost. They obviously have the female romantic lead who falls for the outsider, causing a little bit of friction between the other Vikings. They both have interesting ways of dealing with how does this outsider understand the Norse language. They're clever little ways, instead of just, obviously they're Hollywood films, so you're not kind of subtitles throughout the whole thing. So the 13th warrior gets round it because Antonio Banderas, his character, is a scribe and a poet and a learned man. He just sits round a campfire. I have seen people criticise, he learns their language in a night. But it's not, because if you realise it's very cleverly edited, because one of the nights it's raining, possibly two of the nights it's raining, so he's maybe learned their language in a whole 4 nights, and days obviously, because he just lip reads and he eventually works it out, and it's a great scene when he actually replies to them in their own language. It puts a smile on my face anyway. Yes, it's daft, but it kind of works. And obviously Outlander, because Jim Caviezel is a spaceman from a very more advanced civilization than the Vikings, he just sticks something in his eye and that bombards him with their language. It starts with man, woman, child, and then of course the first word that he says is the F-bomb. So that's how Outlander gets round him not being able to understand their language. So after those two mechanisms, both Caviezel and Banderas can understand the Vikings, and they can understand him. It's two interesting little ways of how to solve the language barrier. If only life was that as simple as that. Obviously Jim Caviezel has a big space gun at the start, but obviously loses it, so he has to fight this creature, which does seem unkillable for most of the film, with swords and pointy sticks. It's interesting though, because Banderas starts off being useless and not being able to carry a sword, and obviously turns into a fairly handy warrior and killing machine. Caviezel, it's interesting because Caviezel is really the villain, even though he's the hero, because he brought the creature on his ship to the Vikings land. He's pretty much responsible for everybody who dies in the film. He comes up with ideas of how to trap the creature, how to fight the creature, none of which actually go to plan, and more people die. So it's quite funny because by the end of the film he's kind of seen as the hero and the saviour, but it's his fault the creatures are there. We find out the backstory of the creatures, and we find out that Caviezel and his people certainly are the villains, which is kind of interesting for a monster movie. But by the end of the film, Caviezel is like the saviour, even though he's responsible for pretty much every death in the film, which is an interesting touch. Again, both these films, obviously you don't have deep characterisation. Again, the 13th Warrior probably did have a bit more of that, but obviously was cut down when the studio saw McTiernan's version. But again, these Hokum films, you have to have some kind of character stuff. It's like the Naked Gun films, the spoofs. You have to have that grounded character of Frank Drebin, played by Leslie Nielsen, who's not in on the joke. You have to have the grounded character. If everybody knows they're in on the joke, you don't really care about them. You're not really attached to them. So yes, in the 13th Warrior, we don't get to know the 13 warriors. We only get to know like 2 or 3 of them pretty much. Again, in the longer cut that hopefully one day will resurface, we probably did. I mean, in the credits, it's almost just a characteristic. The happy one, the sad one, the angry one. It's almost just that kind of characterization. Again, the longer cut may have gets to know them better, but even the few of the 13 warriors that we do get to know, the main Viking kind of sidekick, as well as the chief, his relationship with Antonio Banderas is wonderful. He's really likeable, we root for him, so you have that. So again, even though these films are nonsense, you have to at least have some grounded characters that you're invested in and you root for, otherwise they're just all fodder, which unfortunately most of the 13 warriors are, because we never get to know them, we never, again, they're just a characteristic. But how they find the truth of what's going on, what the creatures are that are actually attacking the villages, it is quite creepy. It's kind of nicely done. Obviously there's homages to Seven Samurai. You can't not think of Seven Samurai when you watch the 13th Warrior. But again, Norse legends and Beowulf legends had kind of ideas of 12 warriors coming together and going on missions, essentially. It's a lot of fun. There's a just wonderful speech at the end of the 13th Warrior in the rain, because you got to the last battle in the rain, just like Seven Samurai. that's moving and wonderful. I would say I prefer the 13th Warrior. The 13th Warrior is a better film than Outlander. Outlander is a lot of fun, but it's very daft, obviously. But the 13th Warrior is one of those films that you want to see the extra 20-25 minutes to actually see what it would have been. Because there is something there that could have been even better. I think both these films were mismanaged and mismarketed. Outlander, according to sources, the budget was 47 million and it made 7 million. But again, I think it's garnered a bit more love on the home media markets. And the 13th Warrior again was a box office bomb, because again, Antonio Banderas, can you believe him as being an Arab poet / warrior? Maybe not. People's accents go up and down. Diane Verona plays the queen in the 13th Warrior, and her accent is all over the place. Ron Perlman's accent in Outlander, it's a bit all over the place. But these are things we overlook because both films are just so much fun. Could they have both been better? Yes. Hopefully one day we might see the McTiernan cut, or whether it's been burned from the studio. Because it probably would have more character stuff. And we might actually get to know a little bit more about the 12 Warriors, other than Banderas. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know what you think of these two films, and if you haven't seen them, they're perfect Saturday night films where you don't have to engage your brain too much, and you should get some fun from them. So thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for joining me for another episode of Double Take. Hopefully you'll join me for more episodes of Double Take. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.